Okay, so this is a very special day, not only for Laura, but for me as well. And Laura is the first PhD student that I graduated. Okay, so a little bit for those who don't know that that's a question of Okay, so right, so a little bit of history. So Laura is a Bachelor of Science with honors from SUNY Rockford. Then she went on to Colorado, where she was elected in the Department of Physics. And while there, she participated in conferences and also wrote some papers. And she liked it so much, she decided that's what she wants to do for the rest of her life. So fortunately for us, she then decided to go to graduate school, and she entered the very new program at that time, TBS, Translational Biomedical Science. And then she joined my lab a year later, which I'm very thankful to. So when she just joined my lab, I told her she must be Russian because she has a Russian last name. She just pronounced it wrong. So Shum is basically a transliteration of a Russian word for noise. And believe me, my lab has now been quiet since she joined. So her sparkling personality attracted other sparkling personalities. And this amazing trio, basically what started the whole program in my lab. And together, was a teamwork, as you can see, we were able to perform some really, really heavy tasks. And we faced all our challenges with a lot of confidence. And so one other feature, one other thing about Laura is that she's very brave. So she joined the program that didn't have much of a reputation before. She joined the lab that didn't have much of a reputation before. And she started a project that was completely unexplored before. And it paid off, okay? So here's the list of Laura's publications. And it's really amazing for a graduate student. And I can tell you there's at least 2 more papers that are being written right now, or maybe even 3, maybe even 4. So here's the list of her honors and awards. And it's time to grab it, so I am ready. I'm proud. And without further ado, it's my honor to present to you Laura Shum. And she's going to tell us about her work in microbial role in bone physiology and pathology.
Thanks, Paul. I've been telling for years you have to say really nice things. So, I'd really like to thank all of you for taking the time to come spend with me today. It's a really meaningful day to me, and in fact, so meaningful that my heart rate monitor thinks I've been exercising for at least a few hours. So, Roman is a self-proclaimed mitochondriac, and even though I had been in the bone field for a while when I came to URMC, I saw Roman give one of his faculty talks. And I'm like, yeah, I only did about bone differentiation and osteoblasts for a while, but holy cow, I've never actually thought about the mitochondria once in all of that time. I said, so why don't I go to grad school and spend the next 4 years painting my head against the mitochondria? Before we get into that story, I'd like to start by thanking my committee for their advice over the years. Keith and Archie agreed to be the chair for this. I hope he forgives me because as I was reviewing my thesis last night, I realized I didn't need stuff the same role in the thesis. So I do have at least one revision to take care of. And of course, all of the funding we've gotten over the years, Roman started out with a bunch of small grants, and I'm proud to say that even in that time, he's gotten an R21 and then his first R01, and so we are flush with money, and we have an open lab bench as of a few hours from now. So if you're at all interested in anything I have to say today, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So let's talk about bone loss. Nearly 54% of the population in the United States, age 50 or above, is experiencing some degree of bone loss. This has an annual burden on the healthcare system of up to nearly $17 billion annual dollars. To put this in perspective, that means there's approximately one osteoporotic fracture every 3 seconds. Hopefully none in this room in the duration of this talk. Bone loss is defined as decreased bone mineral density, increased risk of fragility fractures, and changes in the microarchitecture of the bone. During normal bone homeostasis, you have a balance between new bone being formed by osteoblasts and older or maybe tiny cracks in bone being reabsorbed by osteoclasts. So it's constantly turning over. You're always having a little bit new bone being made. And in the course of 7 to 10 years, you might not have the same bone you had that time ago. During bone loss, this homeostasis gets disrupted, and you have less bone formation by osteoblasts and more resorption by osteoclasts. This is a problem, so there are some therapeutics that people are working on to address these problems. The most common is called bisphosphonates. These are an anti-resorptive. They work on the bone resorption side of the equation. There's also things like teriparatide, which is an analog of parathyroid hormone, and this is an anabolic, so it works to make more bone. Problem is, these have some kind of nasty side effects. The bisphosphonates can lead to an upset stomach, it can erode your esophagus, can cause joint pain, and because you're suppressing bone turnover, sometimes it can suppress that too much, and you do need natural turnover to have healthy bone. PTH, or teriparatide, it's administered by daily injection, so that has its own problems with injection sites, and who really wants to stick a needle in themselves every day if they don't have to. Also, long-term use is generally not recommended for either of these. So we're thinking about new therapeutic targets to address bone loss. In a bunch of other tissues, in the heart field, for example, one of the new therapeutic targets that people are looking at a lot are bioenergetics. How are these cells making and using energy, and how can that process be targeted for better targets? If you call a couple of flashbacks to biochemistry, there are 2 main ways that cells can make and use energy. One is glycolysis. This happens in the cytosol. You start some glucose, you run through some stuff, you get some energy, you get a couple of ATP. Or you have mitochondrial oxphos. This is mitochondrial respiration. Some of the stuff from glycolysis then goes into the mitochondria, where you get a much larger percentage of ATP per molecule of glucose. Now, both of these work interconnectedly, but there's also some debate with various cells which one is the primary pathway. So we're interested in maybe looking for new therapeutic targets for bone loss by looking at bioenergetic pathways. As I said before, Roman's background is entirely mitochondria. So our focus is mitochondrial metabolism, which we can also call oxidative phosphorylation, or for the purposes of this talk, oxphos. I know we all think of mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell, and that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about is the energy it can make. But it also does a number of other things within the cell. It has to do with cell death, different signaling responses, whether or not how stem-like a stem cell can be, and it makes a number of substances that can help the cell function. So altogether, the overarching hypothesis of my project was that mitochondrial metabolism has an impact on bone health. And so there's a number of different ways that we went about looking at this, and I'm going to cover all of them today. So first we want to look at mitochondrial function in bone formation, if good is happening good. And we also want to look at if mitochondrial dysfunction starts to happen, how that might impact bone loss. So the different perspectives we'll be looking at this are mitochondrial metabolism in the bone forming cells, the role of mitochondrial function in de novo or new bone formation, what is the function of mitochondria in aging bone and what can go wrong with that process, and mitochondrial function in estrogen-related bone loss. So we're going to start part one by talking about mitochondrial metabolism in bone-forming cells. So the precursors to bone-forming cells, or osteoblasts, are mesenchymal stem cells. These are stem cells that live in the bone marrow, and when they get the right signals from reforming bone, they then go through a few stages of pre-osteoblasts and then immature osteoblasts to finally become a mature osteoblast. And they've got a couple of transcription factors and markers that are upregulated along the way. Once they become mature osteoblasts, they start secreting matrix. This is what you start to think of. It's kind of like a bone cell. It starts turning out collagen and matrix and bone itself. And so as it's starting to churn this out, it's a higher energetic need. So our question was, how are these cells meeting this higher energetic need? Our hypothesis was that mitochondrial function is upregulated during this process of osteogenic differentiation. So the way we started with this is we took some MSCs and we osteogenically induced them. We do this by dumping some special media on them and letting them sit in the incubator for 2 weeks. So at day 0 and at day 14, we looked at metabolic measurements and mitochondrial morphology. We did the metabolic measurements using a nifty little machine called the XF24 analyzer, shown up in the corner here. So this is basically a standard cell culture plate with a special cartridge that goes on top. So down here, we have some cells sitting in the bottom of the plate, and this is a port that sits into every single cell culture dish. In the bottom of the port, we have an oxygen sensor and a pH sensor. And since the cells are sitting in the bottom, this means you can look at perturbations in metabolism in real time. The oxygen sensor can measure how much oxygen there is, or oxygen consumption, which we measure in a term called oxygen consumption rate, and that's a stand-in for OXPHOS, for mitochondrial function. The pH sensor measures acidification, which later we call ECAR, extracellular acidification rate, and that's a stand-in for glycolysis. So these cells are down here being measured in real time. And then what's super cool about the Seahorse machine is each one of these cell culture wells has 4 ports at the top. So you can then inject different inhibitors or drugs along the way and then see what the cells are doing in real time to see if that's upregulating or downregulating oxygen consumption, OXPHOS, or glycolysis. So the way we run our analysis is we run a series of metabolic inhibitors. And what this lets us do is in real time parse out which parts of metabolism these cells are using more or less. So here, Joey, we finally have some data. We have our undifferentiated cells, day 0 here in blue, and osteogenically differentiated here in red. And you can see even at the very beginning, before we've done anything to them, there's a difference in the amount of oxygen these cells are consuming, which is indicative of a higher metabolic rate, a higher mitochondrial metabolism. And this is the same thing shown in bar form right here, the first one. Then we put on oligomyosin, which helps us differentiate what part of that oxygen consumption comes from the mitochondria versus other stuff in the cell. And so that's ATP link respiration, and you can see between osteogenically differentiated and undifferentiated that there's a difference. So if you take all of these numbers together, the takeaway, the take-home message is that mitochondrial respiration is clearly increased during osteogenic differentiation. We also looked at the shape of the mitochondria. What do they look like themselves? This is one undifferentiated cell. So this is about the outline of the cell here. This would be the nucleus, and we stained it with light tracker green, which makes all of the mitochondria light up fluorescently in bright green. This is the inside of the box outline here, and then this is just a little program you can run where it makes a solid line, a trace of all of those mitochondria. And in this single undifferentiated cell, you can see that all of the mitochondria are clear, distinct, separate organelles. And then you compare that to our osteogenically differentiated cell, and you can see there's a fairly dramatic difference. These mitochondria have fused, so now they are elongated, they're connected, they're forming a network throughout the cell. And mitochondria network formation is highly indicative of how active the mitochondria are. So this, taken with the last slide, also is another piece of evidence that mitochondria are more active during osteogenic differentiation. differentiation. So taken together, we've shown so far that mitochondrial function is upregulated between mesenchymal stem cells and osteoblasts, and they go from a more glycolytic phenotype to a more oxidative phenotype. So we want to look at this from another perspective, and now we're going to look at the role of mitochondrial function in de novo bone formation. So our model for de novo bone formation is a spinal fusion surgery. We have a really nice collaboration with our orthopedic surgeons, and they are nice enough to give us some samples from their spinal fusion surgeries. Spinal fusion surgeries are done for a number of reasons, generally to stabilize the spine. Here in a lumbar stenosis, you can see that the spinal cord is starting to get crushed. Here, the vertebrae has cracked. And in both of those cases, you want to fuse two vertebrae together to stabilize the spine, so you're not poking at the spinal cord because it's a delicate thing. The way the surgery is done is the surgeons go into the iliac crest or the hip bone, and they scoop out a chunk of bone marrow, and they use that to induce the bone, or they use that as a bone graft to induce new bone growth to stabilize the vertebrae, along with some rods and screws and hammers and saws and other things that orthopedic surgeons like to use. And remember earlier we talked about MSCs, mesenchymal stem cells, the pre-bone forming cells that are in the bone marrow. So the main hypothesis that surgeons have is that the MSCs in that bone marrow they're scooping out is what's forming the new bone in the spinal fusion surgery. So theoretically, it's those MSCs that get stuck into a bone graft and form new bone. So our hypothesis is that mitochondrial function in those MSCs will correlate to new or de novo bone formation. So the way we looked at this is when the surgeons were in the hip, they also took a syringe and pulled out some bone marrow for us with consent from the patient. And then we took that bone marrow and we ran it through a number of analyses. We would freeze some of it for further use. We measured mitochondrial function within a subset of it. And we also assessed the stem cell quantity within our bone marrow aliquots. The first thing we looked at was stem cell quantity, or the colony forming unit assay, CFUs. And what you do is you basically put a specific number of cells on the cell culture dish and see how many of them form these colonies. And that is indicative of a mesenchymal stem cell being stem-like. It means it can self-replicate. And then we count how many colonies there are that stain and are of a certain size. So CFUs are basically a number, how many colonies are there. And if we correlate that to patient age, we find that there is no correlation. From our younger patients to our older ones, it's basically a straight line, saying that there's not a smaller number of MSCs with age. CFUOs are done the same way, except they're stained for osteoblastic colonies. And you can also see there's not a big decrease in osteoblastic colonies with age. And then what we also do is we do a ratio of CFUO to F. So instead of looking at absolute numbers, that's a ratio of how many colonies there are and how many of those colonies are osteogenic. And if you squint real hard, you can maybe talk yourself into there being a negative or a correlation that goes down, but we only have this one young patient up there, so we're not going to make that correlation on. I'm going to say that there really is no decrease in stem cell number and age. The next thing we looked at is we wanted to know if any of the cell things that we were looking at correlated to actual surgical outcomes. And so 6 or 12 months after the patient got their surgery, they came back into the office and the surgeon took an x-ray and then gave them a lengthy grade. Just like grade school, A is good, D is bad. And so they would look at the x-ray, and A means that the surgery went really, really well. The vertebrae have fused nicely and they're starting to remodel. The D means things are not going so well. The new bone just kind of got absorbed and there's nothing there. And then B and C are kind of between the two. So if you look at patient age and that lengthy grade, we don't see a strong correlation or any correlation between younger patients and older patients in this process going down with age. So whether you're young or you're old, in this patient population, they didn't have worse outcomes just because they were older. With the caveat, you will notice that there are no patients over 80. Here, any patient over the age of 80 is given BMP2, which is an osteogenic inducer. It helps spinal fusion go really well. Anyone who gets BMP2 automatically gets an A. Not automatically. Their outcome is almost always an A. Every patient we have that got BMP2 has an A. The downside is there's a lot of side effects to BMP2, so they don't want to give it unless they have to. But we excluded them for this purpose. But we want to know what these cells were doing with their mitochondria. So we took the stem cells that were in there, and we looked at them with flow cytometry. We excluded all of the hematopoietic and endothelial cells and used CD105 as our stem cell marker. So we took anything that wasn't hematopoietic or endothelial that was CD105 positive, and we stained them for mitochondrial function. CMX-ROS is a mitochondrial stain that accumulates in the mitochondria based on how active they are, based on membrane potential. So we can use CMX-ROS as a stand-in for mitochondrial function. Antimyosin A is our negative control. It basically shuts down the mitochondria entirely. So there was a set of cells that got treated with antimyosin A, and the fluorescent read was shifted negatively, and then anything that was treated with our CMX-ROS and no antimyosin A went up a little bit. So we took CMX-ROS, our mitochondrial function, and looked at patient age. And here we didn't see anyone that had a significant decrease in mitochondrial function with age, with the caveat that anyone that was considered significantly old, anyone over 80, we would exclude it from this. So as we're looking at this data, we were looking at it, we were staring at it, and we noticed that the mitochondrial functions seem to bin into two categories. There's a high functioning and a low functioning group. And we want to know if those correlated with any other outcomes. And luckily for us, it did. The really interesting finding of this study is that every single one of the patients that had higher mitochondrial function in their MSCs had a better surgical outcome. And all of the patients that had a lower mitochondrial function did not have as good of an outcome. I'm also happy to report we are in a very good hospital. This is University of Rochester. There were no patients that had a D as an outcome. So in conclusion of part 2, what we've shown so far is that higher mitochondrial function is correlated to higher bone formation in human patients. So far, everything we've looked at has essentially been a cell in a dish. These were patient samples, but we were still looking at them after they had been removed from the body. So the next thing we want to look at in our perspective is mitochondrial function in aging bone. It's pretty well known that bone loss occurs during aging. I think everyone in this room, whether you work in bone or not, could have told me that. But we want to know what happens to mitochondrial function in aging bone. So our hypothesis for this section is that bone loss in aging is accompanied by a decline in mitochondrial function, and that protecting that mitochondrial function will protect bone. So we had a little bit more of an extensive in vivo setup. We had our mice, and at 3 months, 13 months, and 18 months, we ran them through a number of different measures looking at their bone. We did this in C57 black 6 mice, and then we also did this in a secondary strain, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a minute. So we're not sitting here all day and then some. I'm only going to tell you about some of the data we have here: micro-CT, biomechanics, metabolomics, and electron microscopy. So looking at our C57 black 6J mice, you can see there's very clear loss of bone with age. This is in the tibia. You can see in the 3-month-old and the younger mice, they have a lot of trabeculars, spongy bone here in the middle, and they've got clearly defined rigid cortical bone on the outside. All the way up to 18 months, almost a complete loss of trabecular bone and a thinning of the cortices. And you can see all of that is already occurring by 13 months. When we quantify that micro-CT, it makes it even more clear that you have 3 months to 13 months, a significant drop in how much bone is there. We also looked at this in a couple other bones, in the femur and in the 3rd lumbar vertebrae. And we see the same thing in almost all cases except for cortical bone in the spine, that there's a pretty dramatic decrease of bone with age. Almost more important than how much bone there is how strong that bone is. So we did biomechanical testing, which is essentially a torsion test where you twist the bone under a certain amount of force for a certain amount of time, and see when it breaks. Comparing the 3 months to the 13-month mice, there's a significant decrease in biomechanical properties with age. This is not new. Lots of people have done this, lots of people know this. But we wanted to know what was going on in the mitochondrial function of the bones. So we took some long bones from these mice and performed a metabolic analysis. To do metabolomics, what you do is you take a whole bone, flush out the bone marrow, and crush it up. And then you extract all of the metabolites in methadone. And this is a snapshot in time. Remember that crazy diagram, like the metabolism, the glycolysis, is you can tell how much of each one of those steps is happening at once. And so what we have here is our 3-month-old mice are set to 1, and then the 13-month-old mice are shown as full change over the 3-month-old mice. So you can see in glycolysis, all of the glycolytic metabolites are increased in the 13-month-old mice compared to the 3-month-old mice. There's no significant difference in the TCA cycle, and there's a significant increase in a number of the nucleotides. I'd like to specifically draw your attention to energy charge. Energy charge is a ratio of ATP to ADP to AMP, and it goes through a little equation, and it's basically an indicator of mitochondrial dysfunction. So what this is showing you here, that since this one's higher, there's a higher amount of mitochondrial dysfunction in the 13-month-old mice compared to the 3-month-old mice. Since this was indicative of mitochondrial dysfunction, we want to look at the mitochondria themselves. Here are the osteocytes of a long bone. This is an electron microscopy done by Karen Bentley. And you can see this is a cell, an osteocyte, and then these little arrows here are pointing out a bunch of mitochondria, and this box is the inside over here. So this is a mitochondria. You can see a pretty clearly defined border, the cristae on the inside, and it's considered electron dense. It's a little bit darker. So that's a pretty nice, healthy, well-functioning mitochondria. If you look at the 13-month-old mice, this guy is not looking as good. You've lost the clearly defined cristae in the middle, and it's swollen. You can see through it. It's got increased, you can see through it more easily. So this is indicative that the mitochondrial integrity isn't there anymore, so it's not functioning as well. And we quantified this and found that there is a significantly higher number of swollen mitochondria in the older mice than the younger mice. And we wanted, well, we didn't want to know. We knew what causes mitochondrial swelling. The most common cause of mitochondrial swelling and mitochondrial pathology is the mitochondrial permeability transition pore, or the MPT. This is a pore that sits on the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And then when the mitochondria is stressed out for some reason, for example, if there's too much calcium, if there's too much reactive oxygen species, this pore will come together, and well, the two ATPases will come together and basically form a hole in the mitochondria. It's a non-selective pore, so water, solutes, anything you want can get in and out of the mitochondria. And this disrupts that electrochemical gradient you need to form ATP with the mitochondria. The way you can keep this pore closed is with its protein chaperone, CYP. The pore only forms in the presence of CYP. So if you either genetically delete it or pharmacologically inhibit it, you inhibit this pore from opening. So we have a CYP knockout mouse model. And what that means is it's an MPTP loss of function model. So this is a model of protected mitochondrial function. That's a model we want to follow. So the take-home message here is the CYP knockout mouse model has protected mitochondrial function. And I already showed you before that black 6 mice lose bone with age. So we want to know if the CYP knockout mice would also lose bone with age. And they didn't. So here looking at 3, 13, and 18 months, you can see that much like their 3-month-old counterparts, the 18-month-olds still have a fair amount of trabecular bone and still have thick cortices. When we looked at the tibia, femur, and L3, none of these parameters decreased with age like they did in the black 6 mice. We also wanted to look at biomechanical properties, and we saw the same thing. As you saw before, bone toughness and bone strength, this is the torsion test, they will significantly decrease in age in the black 6 mice, And you don't see the same decrease with the CYP knockout. So we also looked at the metabolomics in these mice. Again, as you saw before, the black 6 mice, they had a significant increase with age, and they had an increased energy charge. The CYP knockout mice don't have an increase in their 3-carbon glycolytic molecules. Their TCA cycle looks pretty much the same, and they don't have the increase in energy charge. So what this is indicating in there is not that glycolytic shift with age that you saw in the other ones. They have protected mitochondrial function. We also looked at the mitochondria themselves, and you can see that they didn't have the increase in number of swollen mitochondria. As a reminder, this is what the mitochondria from the 13-month-old mouse look like in the black 6. But in our mitochondrial protected one, you can see they're still dark. They still have defined edges and really clear cristae in the middle. So if we take all of this together, we've shown, and I believe we are the first to show, that mitochondrial function declines in aged bone, that protecting mitochondrial function can protect against bone loss during aging. So we've shown that if you increase mitochondrial function, you can increase bone formation. If you decrease mitochondrial function, you have decreased bone aging. And if you stop that mitochondrial function from declining, you can also stop the loss of bone with age. Now, one of the most studied pathological factors during aging is loss of estrogen and estrogen signaling. So finally, we looked at mitochondrial function in estrogen-related bone loss. Estrogen signaling is fairly complex. This is one of the absolute simplest figures I could find that still covers a lot of the basics. There are 3 generally agreed upon ways that estrogen signals get into the cell. The genomic pathway is where the estrogen itself goes through the cell membrane, attaches to an estrogen receptor floating around in the cytosol, then translocates in the nucleus, attaches to the estrogen response factor and starts turning out either upregulating or downregulating genes. There are also membrane-bound estrogen receptors that estrogen can activate, or there's a newer, vaguely controversial, depending upon who you talk to, G protein coupled receptor that estrogen can attach to. So this sits on the membrane, and then when estrogen attaches to it, it can go into the cell. And although these arrows are pointing to some of the protein cascades that the other membrane-bound receptor can, there's still a lot of debate and about what exactly this pathway can upregulate, downregulate, where it goes. There's a number of papers starting to show that GPR might be directly correlated to mitochondrial function. Some things that are pretty well known is that estrogen supports bone formation, and that loss of estrogen signaling leads to loss of bone. It's fairly well known, even to the people not in the bone field, that after menopause, when you lose estrogen signaling, you have a decrease in bone. And then in the mitochondrial field, it's been shown multiple times that estrogen can be protective to mitochondria. So we kind of wanted to put all of this together, and our hypothesis is that mitochondrial dysfunction is involved in estrogen-related bone loss. So we did 2 different things here. We did an in vivo setup with cells in a dish, and then later on we have a mouse model too. So in our in vitro experimental setup, we looked at mitochondrial function in osteoprogenitors or stem cells, the MSCs, and then also in fully formed osteoblasts. And then we looked at MPTP opening, our forefront, plus minus estrogen in both of these cell types. So just looking at mitochondrial function in MSCs, we use TMRE. This is another fluorescent indicator that accumulates in the mitochondria based on how well it's functioning, and showed that if you take a cell in a dish and dump some estrogen on it, you have an increased mitochondrial function. In our osteoblasts, or differentiated cells, we did the same thing. We used the seahorse again and looked at basal respiration, or how much oxygen is being consumed, and found that if you add estrogen, you indeed get higher mitochondrial respiration. So then we also depleted some estrogen. We charcoal stripped the serum, so you basically take out everything that could have estrogen signaling in it out of the cell culture. And we found that it decreased mitochondrial function. If you add estrogen back, it increases mitochondrial function. And if you inhibit the pore with CYP-D, after depleting estrogen, you don't have the same decrease in mitochondrial function. So if you remove estrogen, it decreases mitochondrial function. But if you remove estrogen and protect the pore from opening, you don't have that same decrease. We also looked at a direct measure of the pore opening with the CRC assay. It's basically you dump a bunch of calcium onto the mitochondria until it stresses out and the pore opens up. Unless you dump estrogen on, and then the pore doesn't open as readily. We did this both in MSCs and in osteoblasts, and found that if you treat them with estrogen, that MPT is less likely to open. So estrogen is conferring mitochondrial protection to these cells. So earlier I told you about our SIFT knockout genetic mouse model, and that it was protective to bone during aging. So we were curious if this same mouse model would be protective against estrogen-related bone loss. So now we use a surgical mouse model in the same knockout model. So we use ovarectomy. Ovarectomy is a surgical model where you take out the ovaries of a mouse. So you're taking out the main producer of estrogen, of systemic estrogen signaling. We have our SIFT knockout mice, and then our SIFT wild type, the same litter race. And we did an ovarectomy and what's called a sham surgery on both of them. Sham surgery is basically the same thing. You slice the mouse open, you pull out the ovary, you go, yep, that's an ovary, and then you tuck it back in and sew the mouse back up. And this is so the mouse goes through the same stresses as it does with the ovarectomy, but without the removal of estrogen signaling. So 8 weeks after we did the surgery, we did DEXA to look at bone mineral density. We did micro-CT and biomechanics to look at all of these bone properties again. And today I'll be telling you about DEXA and micro-CT. First, we wanted to make sure our model worked. And when you do that is you look at the uterus itself. The estrogen signaling from the ovaries keeps the uterus happy and healthy. And then if you take away the estrogen signaling, you get a sad, shriveled up little uterus there. In all of the mice we used here, there's a significant decrease in uterine weight with all of the overoptimized mice, so we know this surgery actually worked. However, we found that the SIFT knockout mouse model does not even remotely protect against overactivity-induced bone loss. To orient you to this slide, 100% for both mouse strains is the sham surgery, and then the experimental mice are shown as percent change over the sham. So looking at just the wild type mice here, they had a significantly increased amount of body fat over their sham counterparts. And then if we look at the SIFT knockout, they also, their overoptimized mice also had a significant increase in body fat over their sham surgery. Both of them lost a fairly similar amount of bone mineral density. Looking at micro-CT, this is looking at the femur specifically. Across the board, you can see there's not really a difference between the two genetic strains. In both knockout and wild type, they lose a pretty similar amount of bone in all of the trabecular bone, but then in the femur, the overactivity doesn't really affect. We did the same thing. We looked at the tibia and the spine as well, and to spare all of us from having to look at slide after slide after slide of negative data, I can promise you they all look the same. So in conclusion to part 4 here, that despite what we showed in vitro, that there are some interesting correlations between estrogen and mitochondrial function, when we look at our in vivo model, mitochondrial dysfunction is not related to estrogen-related bone loss through SIFT. So some final perspectives on this. We've shown that stem cells use mitochondrial metabolism when becoming bone-forming cells. We've shown that a higher mitochondrial function in stem cells correlates to a better surgical outcome. We've shown that mitochondrial function declines in aging bone, and if you protect that mitochondrial function, you can protect the aging bone. But that protecting mitochondrial function does not protect against estrogen-related bone loss. So our final conclusion is that mitochondrial function is important to bone health and is a promising new therapeutic target. So some of the future directions that the lab will be going in is, can you fix a broken mitochondria? All of the different things I've shown you so far have to do with preventing mitochondrial dysfunction. And so the lab is starting to become interested in, can you fix it once it's already kind of declined a little bit? So we have a bunch of experiments going on with sodium oxybate right now. Oh God, remember this slide again? Sodium oxalate is lactate dehydrogenase. So this little guy right here, once you go through part of glycolysis, you get pyruvate. And then pyruvate is changed to lactate by this little enzyme here. Stops, if you treat a cell with that, stops that from happening and shoves all of that pyruvate into the mitochondria. So you're starting to ramp up mitochondrial function. Teaser, I'm not going to tell you what happens. The bone does a lot better. So that's some stuff that our lab is currently working on, and some other things to look at how mitochondria impacts bone. My own future directions, if you haven't heard, I'm leaving very soon. I've accepted a postdoc at UConn Health in Connecticut. I'm going from one long Eastern European to another. You can see the face of someone that I've been working with for a long time versus the smile of someone I have yet to work with. So there's lots of people to acknowledge. This was one of the hardest parts of putting this presentation together. If you are in this room, you should probably be on this slide, but I could not make this font any smaller. Lots of people help with every step on the way. And I have a really important thing to say, particularly for students of the CMSR. If you have done most of your training in the center, you don't know how good we have it. We do not, in most labs, you don't have a Sue, you don't have a Janet, you don't have a Sarah, you don't have a Kat, you don't have a Mike. All these people who are helping you every step of the way, who are real experts in what they do, and really, really prop up. When I was a lab tech, I spent about half my time doing what all of those people now help us with, and then a small percentage of time doing research. Say thank you to those people every single day, because they are super, super, super important. I also have to thank the GABA office. They didn't necessarily help with research, but they were like a strong part of what I did many times, and they were awesome. And the lab, they're cool too. So I have a problem. Every single PhD defense I've gone to, I have cried during the acknowledgements. So I am not going to name a single name that's up here. I'm not going to say a word about any of them. See if you can find the picture that my mom's mad about. All of these people up here helped support me. They all got me through this. Yeah, some of you are laughing. Some of them have been around a long time. Some of them have not. This was my sanity during a lot of this. Take them, put them on, take it all, cry a little bit. It's nice. And then the part that Roman has been dreading since the day I started the lab is I can't get away without making fun of this guy just a little bit. He has been a source of inspiration, frustration, comedy, tequila, and a number of other things. If you didn't know it, he is quite an artist. He once drew this little mouse, and I said, "What the heck is that? That is not a mouse." So he turns around and draws this, and I shut my mouth after that. Roman is in the lab a lot still, which I really appreciate. And he still makes mistakes in the lab, which I really appreciate, because I make mistakes too. He once spilled a vial of human blood on himself, and then proceeded to use the chemical shower to clean it off. And unfortunately, we don't have a video of the resulting mess we all had to clean up. I sure hope there's no one in this room that wasn't aware that Roman used to be a rock star. I'm not kidding. This is Roman in his first year of medical school. Yeah. And then he's still trying to relive it. But all of which to say, Roman's a pretty good catch. And we've had a lot of fun throughout the years, and I really appreciate my lab and everyone that came through it and was a part of it, and with that, I'd be happy to take any more questions. And I've got much worse pictures than that I didn't show.
In the silent region outcome measure,
The lanky grade.
the lanky grade, is there a difference between males and females on how well they recover?
Not in our data. I imagine that in the clinical research there probably is, but because these are humans and humans are messy, messy people, there's probably big differences that also have to do with activity level and nutrition and estrogen level. In our data, I have other slides I didn't show, where those dots are colored according to male and female, and it's pretty evenly spread out. Okay.
So I'm thinking about your results, your negative results for the 60 knockouts, Throwing your talk each, but what was that? The balance between osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Maybe osteoclasts are still outstripping the ability of osteoblasts to form, and they aren't sensitive to the 60 knockout. So if you thought about getting your 60 knockout mice, it's possible that it is a standard of care to see people with greater volume inflammation.
We have not thought about giving bisphosphonates to the SIFT knockout. Some of the data I didn't show here is in the SIFT knockout doesn't really affect osteoclast number or function. So although there are people looking at the role of mitochondria in the osteoclast, I think in this case that the aging and osteoclast activity are not really affected by SIFT knockout. Also, what I didn't show here is when I was about halfway through those overactivated monologues, this group came out with a really in-depth paper looking at the differences, the mechanisms between estrogen-related and age-related bone loss. And it's really becoming pretty clear in the field that aging bone loss is osteoblast-centric, and estrogen-related bone loss is more osteoclastic. Yes? I kind of want Maureen to answer that question. Maureen Newman helped me with every single flippin' ovarectomy surgery we did. But also in her lab, they have a lot of bone-targeted therapies they're working on that deliver therapeutics specifically to the resorption pit within bone. So we've been wondering what would happen if we took something that targeted the mitochondria and then put it in one of her little chemistry packages and then had it delivered straight to that area.
For the presentation, I'm not a basic scientist, and browsers I think it's probably. So it seems that you found the solution to the functional view.
Yeah.
Mitochondria, the answer to this functional view. But I'm wondering, someone alluded to this, that perhaps there is some kind of like gender difference, obviously, based on estrogen. So is the answer to this answer to the conflict, supplementation of estrogen in males. We see more bone loss in females compared to males after a certain age. Obviously, after menopause, you may see that, but over the course of a lifetime, you see a gender difference in variation over time. Also, it's part of the future therapy that is related to CBD or mitochondria target, specifically what comes like estrogen supplementation across genders. It's a big piece. We're just going to have to try.
Estrogen replacement therapy is one of the gold standard hormone replacement therapy for bone loss in women. I am not aware of if they've tried estrogen therapy in men. There are differences in maybe not overall amount of bone loss, but rate of bone loss is very different between males and females. Males just kind of like have a steady decline past a certain age. Women are kind of like a little bit, and that falls apart. And so, just laughing at my sound effects. But I mean, in some ways, I'm thinking about this through a mitochondrial lens because I've been in the mitochondria lab. The mitochondria more or less is the foundation. In a lot of systems, it's the mitochondria that starts to decline with aging, and when it's protected, it often protects against that. That, of course, brings up the statement of the generic question: is it something in aging that causes the mitochondria decline? Is it the mitochondria decline that causes aging? There are differences in gender and mitochondria. There's a lot of different differences in mitochondria across different types of people that my boss is vaguely looking at. I'm not going to touch the 10-foot pole, but it is interesting. There are entire foundations. We never talked about the Methuselah Foundation. There's a bunch of nut jobs out there that are trying to like literally find a fountain of youth, and they also fix the mitochondria. They're just trying nuttier things to fix it. What else? All right, thanks for coming, guys.